Hello and welcome to Storytelling. Lisa had just finished going over her most recent draft of her speech, and she was sitting at the kitchen table. She had gone through it several times over, searching for that one fatal flaw, but it was nowhere to be found. She contained all of her arguments, along with every expected counter-argument and responses to it, in 3 pages of notes. She finally came to the conclusion that she could win this speech. She grinned, thinking briefly about what she did have to lose, even though she might not win. At least she couldn't lose. No, that would be far too much, and she couldn't risk it. Satisfied with the actual words, she focused on the timing. Dave might understand if she presented everything to him gradually and acknowledge her need, at which point he might agree. That would, however, give him time to present refutations. She knew his mind like her own, having known him for 18 years, and she came to terms with the fact that he would prevail in a logic war. Thus, slowly was removed. Her preferred course of action was left, shock and awe. Before he had a chance to calm down, hit him hard, hit him quickly, and get his agreement. Was his consent essential? Indeed, without it, nothing would have occurred. That was where there was no risk. Lisa got up and walked nervously around the kitchen. She did this to divert her attention from the suffering she knew she was going to cause her husband. She wouldn't get what she deserved without it, even though he didn't deserve it in the slightest. It was something she had to do. She consoled herself with the thought that since he had pushed her into this situation and left her with no other option, it was his fault. Searching the kitchen, Lisa tried to recall the last time she had spent a weekday there by herself. It needed to be 6 months or more. She had always been the one to arrive home before the kids did and welcome them when they got home from school. Why was that different now? His name was JN, simple. As her boss, John was brought in 7 months ago from another office. They had continued to have a typical boss-underling relationship for the first month. That was until he asked her to come into work later one day. He took her out to dinner as a way of saying thank you after completing the work. They found that they had a lot in common. Despite being 8 years her junior and unmarried, they had a lot in common, including a passion for the arts, movies, and fashion. Her work began to draw more compliments, and eventually so did her appearance. As a proud worker who was beginning to worry about the passing of time's aging process on her beauty, she was flattered. After a month, they stopped pretending to be at work and just hung around talking after work, either at work or over coffee. It quickly became a regular occurrence. After another month, she began to covertly accompany him to restaurants more often and skipped family dinners in response to his complaints about being lonely or detesting eating by himself. After 3 months, that also included television series and films. Numerous weekends were also spent showing him the nearby or out-of-town attractions. At home, she justified it by stating that she was expecting a promotion and that she was proud to put in more hours in order to stand out from the crowd. This trick only made her feel a little embarrassed, especially since her husband Dave was totally on board with her newfound aspirations. She was aware that her actions were inappropriate for a married woman, but she couldn't help herself. After 17 years of being a selfless mother, she deserved a few hours each day to herself. She felt more alive and appreciated when she was with JN. Sure, her husband always said how much he appreciated her, but over the years, his expressions of gratitude had become stale because there was only so much he could say. Dave had quietly filled in for her when she had more work on her plate. Upon returning home for the 3rd time and discovering the children unaccompanied, he expressed his belief that their 13-year-old youngest child should not be left unattended. Lisa was still ashamed of herself for yelling at him and acting irrationally at that point. He was free to work fewer hours if that didn't feel right. The following day, when she awoke, he had already left for work at 5 in the morning. When she got home that evening, he was already there, starting dinner and helping the kids with their homework. She'd thanked him for helping her career, barely trembling in her voice. Dave was up and about again, taking charge of the kids' entertainment when her weekend work began. He seemed to love it and rediscover his life's purpose, far from viewing it as a chore. Everyone had a great time, and the kids loved spending time with their dad again. Even at 17, their oldest gave up some of his time to travel with dad and siblings instead of hanging out with his friends. Lisa and John had a platonic relationship up until 3 months ago. Subsequently, on a Saturday, following a delightful lunch and an abundance of praise, John proposed booking an afternoon hotel room. After laughing at his joke, Lisa was shocked to see that he wasn't grinning. That had left her completely stunned. With haste, she excused herself and walked out. She cursed John in her head the whole way home for putting their friendship in jeopardy by attempting to make it sexual. He ought to have realized she would never be unfaithful to her husband. Lisa had an awful Monday at work. JN handled her with professionalism and coldness. By week's end, she was truly missing him. There were no lunches, no meaningful conversations, and not a single compliment. Despite her habit of lounging after work every day, she realized that the affirmations of her professional and feminine strengths, along with other compliments, had grown increasingly significant to her ego. Dave was certainly helpful and kind, but it wasn't the same. That week, 2 things occurred that ought to have given Lisa a screaming fit of obsession. The first was on Wednesday, when she arrived home to find her dinner only half finished. While he picked up their oldest child from soccer practice, Dave asked her to finish it. Lisa was still sitting where she had been when he left. Dinner had not arrived yet. That set off their first exchange of words. In front of the kids, Dave wondered if it was worth it to concentrate on work. She gave him the runaround, venting to Dave all of her resentment at John's lack of attention. By the time they went to bed, she had settled down. When Dave inquired about their well-being, she denied any issues. Dave saw her mind was elsewhere before the conversation was even half over, so he didn't even attempt to pursue some intimacy. The taunts were becoming a little degrading. John came to Lisa on Friday afternoon and apologized. He rationalized his actions by blaming his loneliness and intimate contact with such a lovely, desirable woman. Lisa told him she was a married woman who would stick by her husband despite her forgiveness. In response, John asked Lisa if any of her co-workers would be willing to listen to him vent his frustration. This made her feel all of her possessive tendencies. She gave a prompt, negative response. They said their goodbyes with enough friendship that she consented to sneak away the following day to see a show and have lunch. The second obsession trigger happened that Friday night when Lisa got home. The children and Dave were preparing to go camping. They told her that this long weekend trip had been planned for a month when she inquired about what was going on. When she denied knowing anything about it, they all gave her a disbelieving look. When they told her that nothing else had been discussed at dinner all week, she just didn't believe them. She thought it was unreasonable of them to refuse to reschedule, citing the fact that it was the final long weekend before winter arrived. Ultimately, a frustrated family departed without her, and an extremely irate Lisa remained at home by herself. The only comfort she found was that they had given her 3 days to make up with JN. When JN declared he would be unavailable on Sunday and Monday, following the show the following day, it really got to her. Lisa was obviously in an area without cell service when she attempted to get in touch with her family to meet them wherever they were. When they got back, Lisa was still irate. In case they told her and she hadn't listened, she didn't want to chastise Dave for not knowing where they had gone. That night, on the grounds that she needed to be fresh for work, she declined his advances for personal contact. When Dave hinted that her ambitions were driving her away from her own family, she began to feel a little uneasy. Once he had recovered from her verbal abuse, she turned her attention back to organizing her next week with John. Before 3 a.m., she woke up with a start. She had an epiphany about the harm that this past weekend and the previous evening's conversation were causing to her ideal marriage and family. The idea of Dave walking out and leaving her to raise the kids by herself gave her the chills. The idea of losing the amazing, caring, and considerate man she had selected as her life partner was far worse than anything else. With a vow to temper her extramarital affair, she cuddled closer to her husband. It felt so good to be in her arms. Though she thought better of it, she didn't wake him up the way she used to when they were younger. In less than 2 hours, the poor man had to get up. When she walked in the door later that night, Dave must have sensed her intimate needs subconsciously because he came up for a big hug. By then Lisa was back under John's spell and scarcely returned it. It also set the tone for the following month. Things with John returned to normal in a week. Her family and marriage were also. But it was the new normal now, with the four of them joking and laughing and chatting away while Lisa sat outside distractedly, completely oblivious to the worried glances Dave shot her way several times a night. Dave broke down at last and pleaded with her to give up on the promotion. Reiterating his love for her, he admitted his fear for their family's future as a result of all this extra work. Regretfully, he could not have chosen a worse day to pass away. That very day, John had finally expressed his desire to advance their friendship, tactfully but firmly stating that their continued relationship would only continue if she agreed. Lisa was preoccupied. She shuddered at the thought of losing all those compliments that boosted her ego. Lisa was contemplating her next move as Dave pleaded and pleaded. It was an obvious choice. If John and her husband Dave had to make a simple decision, what would happen? She would do anything to avoid having to make the decision, but Dave would prevail in the end. She needed them both, the one to support her faltering ego in her early 40s and the other to satisfy her need for stability. Lisa was using her considerable intelligence to find a risk-free solution long after her husband had fallen silent. She had it by 2 in the morning. She reiterated that she would never cheat on her husband when she told John about her plan the very next night. She spelled everything out. She would entice Dave to join her in a threesome, in which John would coincidentally become the third member. Since the men had never met, it would just be a case of picking John seemingly at random. If that succeeded, she would seek permission from Dave to work on a plan to spend some alone time with John in the future. That wouldn't be deceitful. She did ask John to be patient as she explained that it would take some time to win Dave over. John took a while to respond. He thought about the one he had given up on in this endeavor. He was convinced that as soon as he crossed her made-up boundary, all doors would open and he would be able to have her anytime he wanted, should he so desire. He gladly consented, warning her he wouldn't wait forever. Lisa was so appreciative that she didn't protest when he gave her her first proper kiss. After a few minutes, he cued her left breast firmly with his hand, and she drew the line. She pushed his hand away, reminding him of her promise to remain faithful, and became enraged at her own excitement. They left for dinner. She didn't feel especially anxious about bringing up the topic with Dave because they had a history of being forthright and honest about their fantasies, having role-played numerous times over the years. That evening, she was too exhausted to raise it and would rather masturbate after Dave had gone to sleep. She waited for Dave to go to sleep again the following night because she didn't feel comfortable in the atmosphere. This time, her imagined coupling with John was just so hot that she couldn't help but let out a little moan as she masturbated. She was startled, slightly horrified, to see Dave come rolling toward her. "Don't you think this is a little unfair?" he asked. "Why? What's not fair? You laying there pleasuring yourself after knocking me back for the last few months." Lisa was taken aback. Surely it couldn't have been that long? "Darling, has it really been that long?" "Too damn right. You've been too worn out, too grumpy, or just told me to screw off whenever I tried to start something since you started chasing that promotion." Even though Lisa was as embarrassed as she was, she knew this was a great chance to bring up the topic she wanted to. She took a few minutes to console herself about the impact her infatuation with John was having on her union. Then she tried to find a way to start the discussion. Dave sighed and turned away, but she was too busy to notice. Once more, she realized Dave's ego might be affected by bringing up the prospect of a threesome following a 4-month hiatus. It could mean that she was no longer interested in him alone. No, it was safer to get back in touch with Dave first. She rolled in his direction and pulled him in. He snorted once he was on his back. Lisa was too ashamed to even look like a jerk. Before it hurt her marriage, she needed to get this out of her system. Lisa worried until John came into her life. There was absolutely nothing wrong with her marriage or her sex life. After 2 days of inaction, John was a little upset with Lisa. The next day, she had to kiss him again to stop him criticizing her. This time he behaved and didn't go for a grope. It did make her horny enough to tongue-kiss Dave when she got home and rub his groin while doing it. Dave's eyes lit up. They didn't even wait for the kids to go to bed. As soon as dinner was over, they retired to the little outdoor shed Dave had built to house their jacuzzi. It was his solution to maintaining a healthy sex life as their children got older. Once inside, Dave attacked her. After her commenting on his impatience, Dave defended himself by saying he didn't want to give her time to change her mind. Dave was considerate as usual, but Lisa only managed to hit her peak when she closed her eyes and remembered John's bulge twitching against her leg that afternoon. The next morning, Saturday, Dave woke her in that special way she used to love, with his tongue caressing her sex. He no doubt thought she put the pillow over her face to stifle her moans. In reality, even with her eyes closed, she had trouble pretending Dave was John. It was a pleasant but confusing experience for Lisa. That night, she felt bold enough to broach the touchy subject with her husband. After complimenting his performance over the last 24 hours, she delicately raised that after so many years, they were getting a little stale, and she had become a bit obsessed with the idea of a threesome. With his open and honest outlook on life, Dave immediately suggested they role-play it. This was going better than Lisa expected, so it was back to the jacuzzi. After every session, they collapsed on the custom-provided mattress, exhausted. In fact, the renewed sex with Dave almost made Lisa give up her plan. By a week and a half into what she thought of as Dave's conditioning period, John was getting very impatient, and the compliments were definitely drying up. She found herself having to kiss him practically every day or two just to keep him interested. Eventually, even that wasn't enough, and she felt John withdrawing again. She knew she had to advance her timetable. 2 days later, after another marathon session in the jacuzzi shed, Lisa thought she finally had the courage to ask the question this had all been leading up to. Dave beat her to it. "Darling, the last few weeks have been great. It's been a huge turn-on doing you while our guest licks you. Do you think you would lick her as well? How can we role-play that?" Lisa recoiled in shock as she realized the last 2 weeks of what seemed like total connectedness had actually been a huge disconnect. "What do you think? I want a threesome with another woman? Isn't that what this has all been about?" Dave sounded genuinely confused. Lisa realized they'd never talked details. She couldn't blame him for the misunderstanding. "No, Dave. I was thinking about another man." "Oh." Lisa realized there was no time like the present. Stealing her courage, she launched into her prepared speech. "Listen, honey. The last few weeks have been really exciting for me. Is there any chance we can think about doing it for real with an actual man? I mean, actually give this the serious consideration he thought it deserved." "Well, Lisa, off the cuff, I'd have to say it would almost certainly be a bad move. I can't see any good coming from it. I thought the idea of a threesome with another woman turned us both on. I've got to tell you, the idea of you with another man does nothing for me. What if it was really important to me?" Dave thought. "I'd have to think about it." Lisa, just thinking out loud, about the only way I would ever consider bringing in another guy would be if another time we invited another girl. "No, you wouldn't have to do anything with her, Lisa." I said no, Dave. Lisa was angry. The mere thought of him with another woman just made her so angry. "Forget it, Dave. It's never going to happen." "Then you have answered your own question, Lisa. Another guy isn't going to happen either." Lisa heard in his tone the end of her plans. There was no way she was going to compromise. So, what the hell was she going to tell John tomorrow? As expected, John was not a happy camper. He criticized Lisa for not trying hard enough, then snubbed her for the rest of the week. As usual, Lisa took out her frustrations on Dave. Monday, JN asked her to stay behind so they could talk. He seemed genuinely sad when he told Lisa he could no longer stand being around such a beautiful woman who was sexually unavailable to him. Her husband had forced her into a position where she had to choose between them, and she had chosen her loser husband. He respected that, even though it hurt. He kissed her goodbye, asked her to remember him fondly, and knew she would. He understood their relationship had to return to a professional one. He then turned to walk away. "Wait, John," Lisa stopped him and turned. "Give me another week, please." "What do you have in mind, Lisa?" "I don't know, John. Just give me a week to plan something." With another kiss, they parted. Dave noted Lisa was back to her old distracted self again. That weekend, he thought about her hot and cold mood swings over the last few weeks and about her recent obsession with threesomes. Now he had another thing to worry about. Why had her lipstick been smeared when she came home late on Friday? Time to do some digging. Not having participated in any family activities over the weekend, giving her more time to think, Lisa excitedly cornered John after work on Monday. His eyes lit up as she explained her plan. Halfway through, he interrupted. "You know, Lisa, he may want something in return for this." "Well, there are things I'm willing to give him and things that are not negotiable. We'll have to see. Just remember, sweetheart, if at the end of the day he says no, I will give up our plans altogether." "I'm sorry, John. That's just how it has to be." John said he did understand, and if she needed someone to do a dry run on, he was always available. With his tacit approval, Lisa pretty much spent all of Tuesday and Wednesday at work planning her speech. She started with a basic premise that whatever she did had to be risk-free. It couldn't possibly endanger her marriage and family. She likened it to playing poker. She'd won a $1,000 pot and didn't want to risk it. She wanted to lock that in a time-delayed safe so even she couldn't access it. Then she could continue playing, knowing she could win another $1,000, but even if she lost, she still had the original. On Wednesday night, John took her to dinner for a full dress rehearsal. After the main course, he told her to give him her best shot. "Well, John, I've decided to hit him hard and fast. Tomorrow night, I'll start by reminding him how much I love him, lay it on thick about the kids, you know, how I look forward to their graduations, attending their weddings, and grandkids' christenings. Then remind him about the plans we've talked about for our retirement." John's mind drifted at this point. Typical woman, she launched straight into the emotive stuff that would work brilliantly with another woman. They never seemed to realize men were far less emotive and more rational. "Are you listening, John?" "Of course, Lisa." "Well, after that, I'll remind him that I gave him an opportunity to participate in me having some harmless fun, but he rejected it. I'll tell him he forced my hand, and I intend to take a lover Friday night. Before he has a chance to process this, I'll lay it on thick about it being just sex, a bit of unemotional fun. I'm sorry, John, I'll have to lie a bit there. If he wants to prove his love for me, he'll let me do it. I reckon I have a 75% chance of him saying yes right there and then. What do you think so far?" John silently put the odds much lower than this, but wasn't about to say it. He put his odds of scoring this way less than 50%, but what the hell, it was the thrill of the chase that mattered. He reckoned he could bed her once with zero risk, many more times in the risk of discovery and being sacked for having sex with a subordinate would rise exponentially. Why do it more than once? He'd done this before and realized he'd already had 90% of the fun, but by maximizing the chances of Lisa succeeding, he might get the last 10%. If I was your husband at this point, I would at least demand an open marriage. Well, he can forget that. I don't share. If he insists, I will back down straight away. Him taking another woman would end our marriage. That can't happen. You know you have the ultimate weapon to stop him, don't you? What weapon? Threaten divorce and him living in the poorhouse with no access to the kids if he insists on retaliation. No, I couldn't hurt him like that, not even as a threat. I have no intention of following through with. Why not inflict a little pain, Lisa? It's his fault after all. If he'd gone along with the threesome idea, we wouldn't be here now, would we? At this point, John grabbed Lisa's hands and looked lovingly into her eyes. Come on, Lisa, you deserve this. After 17 years as a dutiful wife and slave to an ungrateful husband and needy kids, you've earned it. Lisa looked into those eyes and felt the warm tingle in her groin. I suppose so. That's my girl. Well, don't get too excited, John. If at the end of this conversation, I even suspect Dave is not on board, then I give in completely. Fair enough. So, can you see any flaws? Can you see how I can possibly lose? John, firmly thinking about himself, replied, No, Lisa, it's definitely a no-lose situation. He shook his head at the depth of this woman's delusions. While they were waiting for dessert, Lisa added a few notes to her outline. When the meal was over, John walked her out to her car and kissed her goodnight. This time she didn't resist as he cued and squeezed her breast but responded by pushing her leg into his crotch. She felt the twitching of his manhood through his trousers and almost swooned. John briefly thought about pressing his advantage, but that would spoil the fun. Okay, lover, I'll book us a room for Friday night. Can we go to your place? I've never even seen it. No way, the walls are way too thin, and you'll be screaming way too much. I can assure you of that. On trembling legs, Lisa went home to her family. She was even more distracted than normal. At one point, she realized she was alone, and everyone had gone to bed. Consequently, she slept in the next day and only woke just in time to see the kids off. She reminded them she had arranged for Dave's parents to pick them up for a sleepover that night and checked they had all they needed. She'd arranged the day off. She had to call John at least 5 times to maintain her courage during the day. She knew her major Achilles heel was her inability to lie convincingly. The obvious question Dave would raise when given her ultimatum was, did she already have someone in mind? In front of a mirror, she practiced saying no. She intended going out and allowing herself to be seduced. Anything else would spur questions she wasn't at all comfortable with. She convinced herself that by remaining cool, calm, and collected, she could pull it off. So, here she was, sitting at the kitchen table, waiting to bushwhack her husband, who was due any minute. It was Thursday night, 24 hours short of a much-anticipated event. The kids were overnighting at their grandparents'. Lisa was totally ready, she just kept repeating to herself, shock and awe, be firm, can't lose, I deserve this. Dave walked in at 5:30 p.m., an hour and a half after his new usual time at 4 p.m. Lisa figured he did that because he knew she had the day off. He saw Lisa sitting at the kitchen table with a 3/4 empty bottle of wine. She rarely had more than one glass, so Dave not only knew this was a very special occasion, but also that her defenses would be weak. Lisa, what are we celebrating? Did you get that promotion? We aren't celebrating, darling, at least not yet. Please sit down. We have to talk, Lisa said. Dave was surprised. Lisa, I'm guessing this has something to do with the fact that you have been so distracted for a long time now, something to do with the fact that you've almost totally ignored your family for the last half year, something to do with the fact that apart from 2 glorious weeks, we haven't had sex for 5 months. Lisa was taken aback. Dave, don't tell me, Lisa. Let me guess. You really love me. You are looking forward to sharing the kids' graduations, weddings, etc. with me. You can't wait until we attend our grandchildren's christenings and retire to live a life of love and luxury together. Despite all that, because I didn't go along with your plan of sharing you in a sneaky threesome, you intend to cuck me with your lover tonight or tomorrow night. Dave paused. Alarm bells were screaming in Lisa's head. Dave had just covered the first page and a half of her notes with stunning accuracy. If she'd been thinking rationally, she would have realized her husband thought much better in a crisis than she did. He proved it the 2 times he'd saved one of their children's lives while she just stood there like a stunned mullet. She was well and truly rattled. In a panic, she reverted to what she knew, her memorized and rememorized speech. But I deserve this, Dave. It would just be sex, a bit of unemotional fun, something to spice things up for us, with no interruption from you. In her panic, Lisa simply rolled into the next part of her speech, completely forgetting it was contingent on Dave's expected responses. It was the latest addition to the script, being John's suggestion of last night, and she hadn't memorized it as well as the rest. "You can't sleep with other women. I'll divorce you. I could make it so you never see the kids. The courts will take all your salary for house payments, alimony, and child support." Lisa stopped as the expression on Dave's face finally registered on her befuddled mind. It wasn't the look of hurt she'd been steeling herself to resist. It definitely wasn't the look of resigned acceptance she'd dreamed about. It was a look of thunder personified. What's his name, Lisa? Whose name, Dave? The name of the person who played on the paranoia of a worried middle-aged housewife, a woman terrified of her fading looks, a woman who gave into a low-life prick that played up to her genetic drive to procreate one last time before it's too late. What is his name, Lisa? This was so far off all Lisa's preparations for this conversation. She was totally incapable of rational thought. She simply responded to her husband's order. John. But he's not like that, not at all. How long have you been seeing him, Lisa? I never? We haven't, Dave. I would never cheat on you. Bullshit, Lisa. You've been coming home late every single day for 6 months, going out on weekends, and just about totally ignoring your family, cutting me off emotionally and physically. Was it his idea that you stopped sleeping with me as soon as he started? His idea to invite me for an intimate threesome just so he could cut me in person? Lisa was suffering from a combination of being offended and horrified at the same time. How could she prove Dave was wrong? No, you've got it all wrong, Dave. The late nights and weekends were just he and I talking, just going to dinner together and talking. I'm calling bullshit, Lisa. What about last night when you came in with your dress all creased and your lipstick all over the place? I know what you look like after you've just had a quickie. Lisa was yelling now, desperate to get him to understand. No. I haven't cheated, Dave. I would never cheat. It was just talking, dinners, and kissing. You have to believe me. I would never cheat. Dave stopped and rested his face in his hands. Lisa had never seen him cry, and she wasn't about to now. They both sat there stunned for several minutes. Dave finally looked up when he thought his face was no longer giving anything away. He was wrong. Lisa was a perceptive woman and knew eyes closed to tears when she saw them. She was horrified she'd caused this amount of pain. This couldn't be happening. She couldn't lose. Desperately marshalling her thoughts, she remembered her script, the last page, the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free clause. That's it. She would give up her plans with John. She would capitulate completely. No harm, no foul, right? The situation was salvageable. Unfortunately, once again Dave beat her to it. Well done, Lisa. Your cheating has killed our marriage and our family. Fuck, it has killed me. I can't believe you threatened to take my kids away from me. Dave rose and slowly shuffled towards the door. Something about the way he said killed me sent an extra alarm bell ringing. It sounded so dead and final. Dave made it out the door and almost to his car before she recovered enough to chase after him. He hadn't given her a chance to play her get-out-of-jail-free card. He had his hand on the door handle of his car before she was close enough to cry out. But I didn't cheat, Dave. Dave stopped dead without turning around. He spoke in a deadpan voice, staying away from your family to spend time with another man while lying to us about the reason, going to dinner with him, kissing him. If that's not cheating, I don't know what is, Lisa. It's over. Lisa sank to her knees, too shocked and numb to support herself. She watched her husband drive off, too stunned to even cry. Can't lose, she reflexively thought back to her preparations for their confrontation. The only time the dissolution of their marriage should have been discussed was when she issued her hollow threat. It had never occurred to her Dave could dissolve it as well. Lisa gave herself the luxury of feeling sorry for herself for a little over an hour. The knowledge she had perhaps terminally fucked up a really good thing was just too big a deal to handle, and she shoved it forcibly into the background. This left another big worry in her heart. Dave's words as he left, but more importantly, his demeanor had set off all sorts of alarm bells in her head. For the first time, she worried about the effect her, well, let's not mince words, ultimatum really had on her husband, a man she knew lived for her and his family. She was terrified he may harm himself. Would he? She'd stated plainly what they both knew: in the event of a divorce, he would lose custody of the children and most of his pay and assets. They both knew of couples where the ex-wife refused to let the husband see his kids, supported by the pro-feminist court system. Would he contemplate harming himself? Fuck yeah, panic said in. There was no answer on Dave's cell. She rang her in-laws to see if Dave was there. He had been but was now gone. They were confused. Dave had only stayed a little while then left after hugging all three of the children. Lisa jumped in her car and drove around to every bar she could think of in the area, looking for his car. She was so distracted she ran out of fuel and had to call her dad to bring a jerry can. He saw she was in no fit state to drive, so he took her home. Once there, she broke down and told her parents Dave had left her. She could see the hurt in her mother's eyes. Her father's words left nothing to the imagination on what he thought of his son-in-law. Eventually, her mother conceded the logic of Lisa waiting at home and dropped her back to her car. Lisa went home, and in the wee small hours, fell asleep on the couch. The nightmares finally woke her at 7 a.m. Before she could recover from the grogginess, the panic hit again. She feverishly checked her phone for messages. There were none. She dialed Dave's cell. It went straight to message bank, like it was turned off or flat. After all, his charger was right next to hers on the kitchen counter. She rang his work, only to be told he hadn't shown. She rang the police, but when she told them why her husband had left, they said she was on her own. By this time, it was 8 a.m., so she got Dave's address book and phoned every friend she could find a number for. Everyone said they hadn't seen him. She then literally spent all day driving to every possible place she could think of, returning to the house every 2 hours or so to see if Dave's car was there. It never was, and his cell continually went to message bank. The only time reality impinged on her frantic but pointless activity was when a message arrived on her phone. It was a simple one from John: "Hi. Room 77. 6 p.m. You know how you cringe when someone runs their fingernails down a blackboard?" That's what Lisa's soul did when she read that message. She buried that deep as well. The next phone call was from Dave's parents. They still hadn't heard anything and wanted to know what to do with the kids. Lisa asked them to look after them until further notice. Returning home, Lisa sat on the couch and cried and cried. She must have slept on the couch again, as she woke with a start at 3:30 a.m. She wept again as the now familiar hopelessness washed over her. She tried to picture Dave's face, but couldn't. She knew then, with an illogical certainty, David was dead. She felt insanity beckoning, and no, she thought, I can't face that. With practice, that thought was buried deep as well. With dread, Lisa got back in her car. As she did, she noticed her cell on the passenger seat where she left it. There was 1 message from her eldest and 6 from John. She listened to the single one just saying she missed her mom but ignored the 6. Lisa then spent the time until about 10 a.m. driving around the possible local suicide spots looking for Dave's car, bridges, ravines, any place out of the way where he could have parked his car and put a hose on the tailpipe. Nothing. Lisa called his parents and all of his friends once more in a desperate attempt to get a response from them. This time, she suspected Dave wasn't telling the whole truth after he called his oldest friend, who was actually an old boss of his. After finding his address online, she made the decision to go by his house and try to spot Dave's car. He was fortunate to live in a wealthy area. She located the house, but Dave was nowhere to be found. 3 doors down, as she was leaving, her gaze was caught by a unique Lexus. It was John's vehicle. It was parked, among many other fancy-looking houses, outside another one. She found herself drawn to the prospect of receiving solace from a man who was, above all, her friend. After parking, she walked up the path to the front entrance. She could tell there was a Saturday afternoon party going on by the muted sounds of revelry inside. There was a wall-mounted panel next to the door that had an intercom button, a bell push, and a security keypad. She gave it a push. The general manager of her company answered the door. "Hello, Lisa, isn't it?" "Absolutely, Mr. Goldsmith." Outside, I spotted John Stanhope's car. "Would you please let me talk to him?" "Lisa, naturally. Do you want to enter?" Lisa considered her clothes from 2 days ago and her pallid appearance. "No, sir. Thank you. If it's good with you, I'll wait here." "Yes. For you, I'll get him." John entered the room a little more than a minute later. After giving Lisa a quick glance, he turned to check if anyone was watching them. With a deliberate close of the door, he embraced Lisa, pressed her up against the wall, and planted a kiss on her. Lisa struggled to find solace and to place the blame for her desperate situation on someone. A compromise allowed the human need for comfort to triumph. She gave him a frantic hug instead of continuing the kiss. "Lisa, what happened last night? Where did you go?" "John, it's awful, I know. Dave seemed to know everything when he got home on Thursday night. I was accused of cheating on him by him. I informed him that we had only had a few dinner dates, exchanged kisses, and talked. However, I could tell he didn't trust me. He was prepared for what I would say. Even that last night when I was going to tell him that I was going to have sex with you, he knew. I believe he might have gone somewhere and made a foolish decision. He has not been seen since Thursday." "You fucking bitch. While I waited to move up here, was this what you were doing? We relocated to escape all of this garbage. You said you wouldn't do it again." She lost it at this point and started biting John's face with her fingernails. He raised his arms in self-defense. Lisa instinctively grabbed the yelling woman to keep her friend safe. Seeing that her opponent was undefended, the enraged woman turned around and delivered a powerful backhand that knocked her against the wall. Again, Lisa's back unintentionally hit the intercom button. Her agonized cries could be heard briefly in the foyer. Stunned, she slid to the floor slowly. The powerful woman went back to trying to breach John's barriers. Abruptly, the matriarch emerged from the door and took the thrashing woman's arms with a firm but gentle grip. "Mrs. Stanhope, please, violence is not the solution. My husband has been the target of that man's manipulation." "Yeah, I did hear. However, murder is not the most civilized way to resolve disputes." He shifted his gaze between Lisa and John. "My office, you too. Monday at 9 o'clock. He closed the door behind him, taking John's wife by the arm and guiding her back inside. With a sob, John ran for his car, leaving the woman slumped on the floor, clearly suffering from severe cognitive overload. At last, she mustered the mental fortitude to return home. After hearing what a horrible state Lisa was in, her mother called her father and persuaded him to come get her and take her back to her childhood home. She cried all night, slept for the most part of the following day, and then cried all night again. The general manager of Lisa's company met with his HR manager on Monday at 11 a.m. "So, what do you want to do, boss?" "I made a promise to Mrs. Stanhope that I wouldn't fire her husband until she had made up her mind about what she wanted to do, so I really can't do anything until I hear her side of the story. I am aware that she has gone to her mother's house with the children. Mrs. Brown's story must be obtained before we can fire her for cause, right?" "Not really, no. Yet, she didn't show up today or on Friday, and she hasn't called in sick. She effectively fires herself and violates her contract if we don't hear from her by tomorrow's close of business." "All right. That has a lot more clarity. Did you accept his claim that they only kissed and had private talks rather than engaging in sexual activity?" "Who gives a damn, boss? Regardless of how you slice it, it remains dishonest." After she got home, Lisa just sat on the couch and started crying. She woke up at 3 in the morning, so she must have slept on the couch again. The familiar hopelessness passed over her, and she started crying again. She attempted, but was unable, to visualize Dave's face. At that moment, she was certain beyond reason that David had passed away. She sensed the call of insanity and thought, no, that's too much to handle. That thought was buried deep too with practice. Lisa climbed back into her car with dread. She found her cell on the passenger seat, where she had left it, as she was doing this. John had 6 messages, and her oldest had 1. She disregarded the 6 and only paid attention to the one that said she missed her mother. After that, Lisa drove around potential suicide locations in the area until around 10 a.m., searching for bridges, ravines, or any other out-of-the-way spot where Dave could have parked his car and attached a hose to the exhaust. Nothing. Lisa became so desperate that she called his parents and all of his friends again after hearing nothing from them. This time, she suspected Dave wasn't telling the whole truth after he called his oldest friend, who was actually an old boss of his. After finding his address online, she made the decision to go by his house and try to spot Dave's car. He was fortunate to live in a wealthy area. She located the house, but Dave was nowhere to be found. 3 doors down, as she was driving away, her gaze was drawn to a unique Lexus. It was John's vehicle. It was parked, among many other fancy-looking houses, outside another one. She found herself drawn to the prospect of receiving solace from a man who was, above all, her friend. After parking, she walked up the path to the front entrance. She could tell there was a Saturday afternoon party going on by the muted sounds of revelry inside. There was a wall-mounted panel next to the door that had an intercom button, a bell push, and a security keypad. She gave it a push. The general manager of her company answered the door. "Hello, Lisa, isn't it?" "Absolutely, Mr. Goldsmith." "Outside, I spotted John Stanhope's car. Would you please let me talk to him?" "Lisa, naturally. Do you want to enter?" Lisa considered her clothes from 2 days ago and her pallid appearance. "No, sir. Thank you. If it's good with you, I'll wait here." "Sure, I'll get him for you." John entered the room a little more than a minute later. After giving Lisa a quick glance, he turned to check if anyone was watching them. With a deliberate close of the door, he embraced Lisa, pressed her up against the wall, and planted a kiss on her. Lisa struggled to find solace and to place the blame for her desperate situation on someone. The human need for comfort prevailed, albeit at a cost. She gave him a frantic hug instead of continuing the kiss. "Lisa, what happened last night? Where did you go?" "John, it's awful, I know. Dave seemed to know everything when he got home on Thursday night. I was accused of cheating on him by him. I could tell he didn't believe me when I told him that all we had done was talk, go out to dinner a few times, and share a kiss. He was prepared for what I would say. Even that last night when I was going to tell him that I was going to have sex with you, he knew. I believe he might have gone somewhere and made a foolish decision. He has not been seen since Thursday." That was when the door opened again, and a woman with an angry expression stormed out. "You bitch, you fucking! While I waited to move up here, was this what you were doing? We relocated to escape this whole shit. You said you wouldn't do it again." Lisa hung her head and said nothing. Her mom continued, "To answer your question, after you gave him no choice but to leave, Dave went back to work and met an old friend. Oh God, not Debbie. Deborah Harris was the daughter of Dave's business owner. She was Dave's ex-girlfriend, and despite Dave's assurances, she had been a small source of concern for Lisa for years. Lisa was aware that their initial separation occurred because Deb was transferred to a prestigious business college located distant from their hometown. She also knew that Deborah Harris had just gotten divorced. Her worst fears were validated by the look shared by her parents. Dave was taken home by her as soon as she realized how bad he was. He went with her because he needed a place to stay. Ever since, he's been there. He picked up the kids tonight, Lisa, so they could meet Debbie and her kids and see if they get along. According to David, there has never been anything between them before, and it hasn't happened yet. He is incapable of doing that. He must give me an opportunity. From what he told us, Lisa, over the past 6 months, he gave you many opportunities. He expressed his shock at you lying to him about putting in more effort to advance while you were unfaithfully seeing another man. Who is to blame for him? I did not cheat. Stupid girl, cheating doesn't just mean intercourse, said Lisa's father, barging in. I completely agree with him when he says that you cheated on him the first time by lying to him about working late and having private conversations with another man. I'll tell you what, your mother would have gravel rash on her as from running into the path in front of her. He told us how last Wednesday you would come home with all of your lipstick smeared. To me, it sounds like cheating. He soon discovered your neatly arranged little notes in which you intend to intimidate him into allowing you to screw around. He claimed that seeing how heartless, calculating, and cold those notes were, detailing the rewards and punishments you had already decided to employ, broke his heart. How on earth could you make us look foolish like that? It's unbelievable that you threatened to send him to the poorhouse and never allow him to see his children. No, I didn't. I was not serious. If he refused to comply, I was prepared to completely give in. Lisa went back to staring at the table in silence. She witnessed what Dave must have witnessed, the lies, the deceit, the disrespect, and the emotional distance that had existed between them for 6 months, when she saw both of her parents shaking their heads in the icy glare of their disapproval. Her marriage was over, she knew that. Her parents allowed her some time to process everything. How are the kids and I going to survive without Dave? Lisa's parents exchanged a sorrowful look. Her mom's father gave her a nod. Lisa, Dave informed me that he had been thinking about whether the kids would be better off with him or you for the past 5 days. He came to the conclusion that he couldn't risk it being you because of the threats you made against him. Her mother turned back to her father. Squeezing his wife's hand, he offered her support. Lisa, I must admit that we concur with him. Examine it from our perspective. There's a chance we won't get to see our only grandchildren again if we support you. Lisa was once more in disbelief. They allowed her time to reflect. She sensed the rage building. So you're betraying me? Her father was unable to resist. You started it, Lisa. Lisa was given a verbal scolding. I shall battle you all. The mother is always granted custody by the courts. No one can show that I cheated. Lisa, I didn't cheat. Lisa, he needs not provide any evidence. All he needs to do is desire to end the marriage. The kids are old enough that the family court will consider their input when making custody decisions. They were there tonight, I'll tell you that, and you would never see them again if the court had asked them then. When I triumph, you can bid adieu to ever seeing your kids again, I'll tell you that. Lisa ran to her car, her last bridge burned, and they both screamed out. Epilogue, 2 weeks later, a temporary court order was granted. Along with his kind offer of visitation, Dave also included information about his job, his relationship with his kids, his role as the kids' primary caregiver for the preceding 6 months, his new, stable living arrangement, and the kids' wishes. In contrast, there was a disheveled mother who lacked employment and professional references, and who was unable to purchase the required portion of the family home. The judge made an ethically sound decision. Lisa had mostly become her former self again by the time the required 12 months of living apart had elapsed and the divorce was finalized. Her parents had happily accepted her apology for the irrational outburst. Above all, she vowed to be the greatest mother she could be. She even consented to attend a wake with Dave and his new fiancée for days on fortnight. She hardly raised an eyebrow when John sent her a nasty email accusing her of being the reason behind his divorce and termination after receiving the final paperwork. After many nights of contemplation and introspection, she came to the conclusion that her greed prevented her from being content with what she had, which is why her marriage had failed. She took the chance to go for more. The nightmares were really the only thing that tarnished her resigned happiness. They were happening every night at first, but they were only happening once or twice a week. What was most annoying was the sound of singing that resembled a church choir. I deserve this, shock and awe, be firm, can't lose. These days, it seemed she could easily fall back asleep by telling herself, well, 1 out of 4 ain't bad, is it? If you've made it this far, listener, please click the subscribe button. It will be very beneficial.